Hey everyone, and welcome to the MAME Podcast, the show where I interview interesting professors, engineers, and people I want to talk to. I'm Philip. I'm the VP Events of MAME, the McGill Association of Mechanical Engineers. And today's guest is someone that I respect a lot, someone that's given me advice over the years at McGill. And may I present Dr. Michel Ingham.
Hi, Philippe.
Hey,
good to see you.
So I thought it would be a good idea to have you on the podcast, and you could talk about your career and everything.
Happy to do that. Yeah, absolutely. It's been an interesting journey since I was back in Montreal at McGill, and I'm happy to share the path that I took a little bit.
Yeah. So you're an engineer at NASA's JPL, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Sure. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Michel Ingham, although down here in the United States, I go by Mitch because most people have trouble with the French Michel. And my current role at JPL is that I'm the Chief Technologist of the Systems Engineering Division at JPL. For those of you who aren't aware, JPL stands for Jet Propulsion Lab, although we don't do jet propulsion at all anymore. JPL is the NASA center that specializes in deep space exploration, robotic deep space exploration of the solar system and beyond. So you're probably all aware of the Curiosity Rover or the Spirit and Opportunity Mars rovers that have been roving on Mars over the last decade plus. JPL did those missions, for example, or the Cassini mission that went to Saturn and took amazing images and returned interesting science from their moon Titan and the Saturnian system. Also, goes all the way back to the Voyager mission, which was sort of the first deep space mission where JPL sent 2 spacecraft out to fly by all of the planets in our solar system. And of course, both spacecraft are actually still alive and well out in the interstellar medium beyond the reaches of our solar system. So that's the kind of stuff that we do at JPL. It's lifelong dream kind of thing for me to be working in the space industry, which is still at the forefront of space exploration. For me, is sort of like a dream come true.
Yeah, honestly, I find it insane and mind-blowing that like you were where I am right now, and now you work at NASA, and I think a lot of students will find that too, right?
Yeah, I really did follow a similar path. I mean, I was in when I was in undergraduate at McGill, I was in the mechanical engineering department, but I actually did my VP role at the EUS level. So I was the VP academic of the Engineering Undergraduate Society, but similar kind of story, right? I was involved in student politics or student engagement at the time and had a blast there. And then that's when, I had a decision to make. Do I go get a job after graduating? And I had a few interviews to do that, or do I continue to do grad school? And I think part of me had just had a little bit of a taste of research. I was in the mechanical engineering honors program, which I think is still around. So in the honors program, it's sort of a math or researchy kind of heavy variant of the mechanical engineering program. And I had done my research work with Professor Arun Misra, who I understand is also still around.
Yeah, he was my prof in Mech 220, so dynamics. He's a great prof.
Yeah. I really I owe him a debt of gratitude for mentoring me in those early years. And after working with him, when I did my thesis, my honors thesis research in the area of spacecraft robotic manipulators and capturing and birthing space shuttles to stations or capturing spinning satellites with robotic arms. That was sort of my first taste of research in engineering, in aerospace engineering. And then from there, I decided to continue into grad school. I had a decision to make between staying in Canada and doing, continuing grad studies at McGill or maybe UBC or U of Toronto. In the end, though, I had also applied to some graduate schools in the United States, and I got into MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is one of the top schools for aerospace and just engineering in general. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity to go, work at MIT with a new change of scenery. Boston's a wonderful town. It reminded me in some ways of Montreal, but the change of scenery was good. And yeah, so from there I ended up doing a master's in microdynamics, essentially. So dynamics of space structures for very low levels of vibration. They were in particular worried about the vibration environment for space structures that they wanted to use to construct space telescopes. And you can imagine if you're peering out into the distance, trying to ultimately image planets around other stars, the level of stability that you need on those kinds of structures is incredible.
I imagine vibration changes like the whole picture of the telescope. Right.
So people, they had some experience from missions like the Hubble Space Telescope, where just, Hubble goes around the Earth, but when it goes in and out of the shadow of the Earth, they see a lot of vibrations induced by thermal effects. So thermal stresses that build up when the spacecraft goes from, sunlight to shadow or shadow to sunlight, because of the fact that it's made up of multiple different materials with different coefficients of thermal expansion. And then because there are joints and nonlinearities in the structure, the stress builds up and then releases with little slips in these little joints. And they were really concerned that if they built telescopes with deployable structures or things like that, that they would, have an environment that really they couldn't see anything because there was too much mechanical vibration. So I did my master's in that research, and that was a lot of fun. But I guess I felt it was already, getting pretty narrow, not much more narrow than microdynamics, right? So I decided to switch gears at that point. I hadn't had enough of grad school. For me, I was, I wanted to continue and do more research. So I stayed on for a PhD at MIT as well. But I switched gears into spacecraft autonomy. So more artificial intelligence and model-based reasoning, focused on making spacecraft that are more robust and resilient and able to take care of themselves in situations that, that they might not have originally been designed to experience, or that people, weren't necessarily anticipating them finding themselves in. So that kind of, I'm sorry?
Do you have an example of that? Like situations that?
Sure. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen on board a spacecraft. I mean, things fail all the time, for example, and deep space is a very challenging place from a radiation perspective, for example, right? So you might be in the middle of performing some sequence of measurement operations, around Mars, or, even farther. A lot of the work we're doing now is looking out at Europa or Enceladus, which are ocean icy moons in the outer planets. Once you get out there, some of the radiation environments are very high, and radiation can cause spacecraft to reset themselves, or for commands to not be executed properly, or for memory, to suffer glitches and problems. And so recognizing when those kinds of things happen, when a command is not issued, or executed as you'd expect, and then to realize that, hey, I guess I need to reissue that command, or I need to do this other thing because that device that I was trying to use, has failed, maybe I can reset it, by going through a power cycle and then try to take that operation again. Or maybe I need to just call that device failed and use this other redundant device that we took with us, hopefully, to try to perform a similar kind of observation or measurement using a different device. So that's the kind of thing that you want spacecraft that are really remote, very far out there, to be able to do themselves.
Right.
They need to be able to figure out how to take care of themselves, basically. And so that's the kind of research that I did at MIT for my doctorate. And then I went from there over to NASA JPL. I had actually done an internship while I was at MIT, an internship at JPL. And I knew that was one of the places that did the kind of stuff that I wanted to do, right? So I ended up getting hired at JPL after that, and then another chapter of my life began on the West Coast here in Pasadena, California.
Right. So you had an internship with JPL, and then you got hired there.
Right. And a lot of the research that I was doing was essentially motivated by robotic missions. I think the thesis problem that I tackled was a spacecraft doing entry, descent, and landing at Mars, and looking at some of the reasoning that a really smart kind of landing system would be able to do. So that was the example that I had used in my thesis. So I had worked closely with collaborators here at JPL, and to this day, I'm still working, on a day-to-day basis with a lot of them.
And do you still work with students like the same way that they worked with you? For example?
Absolutely. I've been on several thesis committees, people all over the US mostly. But I also work pretty closely with some faculty at Caltech. It's probably not well known, but JPL is the only NASA center that's not a government facility. It's actually run by Caltech. It's NASA owned, but Caltech is contracted to run the facility and do the work. And so we're technically all Caltech employees. It's a complicated story. When I first got hired, though, I was still foreign national, if I remember that far back. But at the time, this was, when I first started JPL as an intern, I was a foreign national, and that was before September 11, 2001. So the world was a little different back then. It was an easier path for non-US citizens to work at a facility like JPL back then. We still have plenty of foreign nationals who work at JPL now. It's just more involved to get processed to sort of get them here.
Right.
But yes, I ultimately got married, and then got a green card through that process. And I actually only very recently became a U.S. citizen. I've maintained my Canadian citizenship throughout, and in the end, there was some practicality about being dual citizen in both countries, and so that's what I am today.
And you mentioned that, to come back on at the beginning, you mentioned your title was Chief Technologist, or what was it?
Chief Technologist of the Systems Engineering Division. So,
is there an acronym for that?
It's CT is the acronym for Chief Technologist. But yeah, it's one of those jobs that doesn't lend itself to a very good acronym. Yeah, I guess my current job is technologist. Really is sort of another way of saying researcher, right? So I'm sort of the primary, I guess, the point of contact or coordinator for research activities within my division, which is the Systems Engineering Division. Systems engineering is the practice of engineering that sort of integrates all of the other disciplines and ultimately is responsible for delivery of the flight system, or maybe it's the overall project, where all of the, the individual pieces like the flight vehicle and all of its subsystems, the ground system, the deep space network that communicates with the spacecraft, all of those pieces need to come together and sort of work harmoniously to sort of deliver the capability of the mission and accomplish its objectives. And so systems engineering is the discipline that sort of brings all of those disciplines together and makes it all, work in the end. And so,
go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, like, what kind of projects you work on. I think you mentioned last year that you worked on the Clipper, right, for Europa?
That's right. So I'm right now, as a chief technologist, I'm actually doing a lot more small little research efforts trying to develop new technology to be used by future missions. But my job before this was I was the project software systems engineer for Europa Clipper. Europa Clipper is our next big flagship mission. Y'all probably saw the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover launch in just a couple months ago, really. Yeah. And so the next big mission that JPL is launching will be this mission to Europa, which is one of Jupiter's moons. It's an icy moon. There's a strong belief that there is liquid ocean underneath the ice crusts at Europa, and where there's water, at least as far as we know in the universe, where there's water, there's a good chance of life. And so if there's any place in the solar system aside from Earth where we're likely to find signs of life, which might be a little bit different than the kind of life we're used to, but still, Europa would be one of those places. So this mission is going to go into orbit around Jupiter, but to do many sort of targeted flybys of Europa, on the order of 45 to 50 flybys, when hopefully for the prime mission anyway, and we'll really characterize the ice surface, characterize the ocean underneath the ice through sounding instruments that we have on board, and then also potentially if there are geysers, as is believed there might be, that send particulates from that ocean out into space. We'll have instruments on board to sort of collect those samples and figure out what's in them. And so it has that sort of sampling aspect, even though we're never going to go to the surface on that mission. There will potentially be a follow-on lander mission, but that's still an early formulation kind of activity, and it's not a real mission yet.
But is it analyzing the particles that you take, is it analyzing them on board? I imagine it's not coming back, right?
Never coming back. Yeah, it's sort of in situ analysis, and then they'll telemeter back the science return, the analysis that was done by the instruments on board, where scientists on the Earth can then interpret what they've seen and figure out what constituency the particles that were collected had. And so on that mission, my role was a project software systems engineer. So I was sort of the person in charge of making sure that the full complement of software for that mission, the flight software and the ground software, sort of got delivered and sort of accomplished what it needed to accomplish, that it was delivered following all the right reliability processes that we expect our missions to follow, and that ultimately we delivered high quality software to execute the mission that we needed to execute. So that was the role I had for about 4 to 5 years, and then prior to that I had worked on a number of different kinds of missions, some proposed missions like a lunar South Pole sample return mission. So that one would have landed on the lunar South Pole in the where they have sort of right next to or very near the permanently shadowed craters of the South Pole of the Moon, and it would have returned samples from the surface of the Moon through an ascent vehicle that would have returned them back to Earth, and that would have been providing a lot of information about the early record of the solar system, actually, because the moon is a very interesting repository for early solar system history, just by its nature as a, you know, a body that doesn't have a whole lot of environmental effects like water flowing or wind blowing or things like that, or an environment or atmosphere to speak of. So I was on that mission for a little while, that proposal. It didn't ultimately get selected by NASA to continue into development. So that's part of the game, you know, when you work in the space business. Sometimes you work on projects that, you know, go to completion, and sometimes you don't, right? That's something you just kind of have to get used to in this business. And then I did work on the Curiosity Rover, which is the Mars rover that people are probably all familiar with, that's on the surface of Mars today. I worked on it very early on, prior to its current incarnation, back when I was first hired at JPL in the 2003 timeframe.
Right. Okay. And to come back on the Europa Clipper, I had a few questions. So you mentioned you do flybys around Jupiter, right? Is that because of the radiation?
So Jupiter, actually, there's an area around Jupiter that has the most challenging radiation environment in the whole solar system. And Europa happens to be sort of deeply nestled right in that really problematic radiation environment. And so if we were to send a spacecraft to orbit around Europa, it would basically be soaking in this radiation environment. And the best estimates that we were able to compute for how long this mission would last would be on the order of 9 months or so. I mean, there's lots of uncertainty there. Who knows? It could have lasted 10 years, but, you know, best estimate was about 9 months. That would have made completing the prime mission of collecting all the science extremely challenging in that span of time, and would have really pushed, you know, our technologies in ways that, you know, the development timeline didn't support. So in the end, they opted for another mission architecture, which was quite creative, actually, which is to do sort of very elliptical Jupiter orbits that swing in and out of that radiation environment, in and out of you know, doing fast flybys of Europa, but then shoot back out, you know, far out into a further, you know, further away around Jupiter. And then that gives us plenty of time after we do that flyby to send all of our data back to Earth, to figure out if anything went wrong, to fix it if it did. And so each of these big orbits is about a 2-week stretch. So from an operations cadence, 2 weeks is actually a lot more manageable than trying to do things on a daily or a, you know, every other day kind of a cadence. So from an operations point of view, it's much more manageable, even though it's still very challenging. I mean, 2 weeks, considering how much data this spacecraft will be returning, is still going to be very challenging, but it's certainly a lot more reasonable than having to have people, you know, working around the clock until, you know, for 9 months. And yeah. So, and then it also extends the lifetime of the mission significantly. And we think that there will even be extended mission opportunities to continue to go beyond those initial 45-ish flybys or orbits.
And in a future mission where you would land there, if you're looking for life, aren't you afraid of, like, isn't there a chance of contamination or something? Because if you bring, for example, things on the spacecraft, or isn't there a chance of contamination? Yeah.
That's actually a really big concern for us at JPL when we do deep space missions. They call it planetary protection. And that planetary protection can mean protecting our planet from things that come back. So when we do our Mars sample return mission, which hopefully we'll do, you know, the Perseverance rover that just launched was sort of the first mission in a campaign to return a sample from Mars. It will sort of cache a bunch of samples in test tubes effectively on the surface of Mars. And then a future mission, assuming it gets funded and is executed, we'll go back to Mars to collect those samples and then bring them back to Earth. But one of the big concerns there is, you know, to make sure that the samples that are returned end up, not contaminating Earth, certainly. But most of our missions aren't worried as much about that because most of our missions go out and they never come back, right? So the other aspect of planetary protection that we care about is taking germs from Earth and bringing them into other, onto other planetary bodies. And there's really, aside from the fact that, it's just not good for us to be, polluting and sending germs all over the place. The most important reason really from our point of view is that we're trying to learn about potential life on these planets.
Exactly.
If we bring life with us inadvertently and it's deposed and then we sense our own life, we could convince ourselves that there's life on another body and it was just, the bacteria that we brought with us, right? So that would defeat the purpose. And so there's a lot of effort, time, money, and effort spent making sure that our spacecraft have a very low risk of, bringing those kind of contaminants to the surface of areas of interest like Europa.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So if we can go back to when you were at McGill, you mentioned you were a VP academic.
Mm-hmm.
And did you do anything else? Do you have any other memory or something?
I do. I was on the flag football team for mechanical engineering, and we did broomball in the winter as well.
Yes, broomball is still going on.
I have no doubt that it's still going on. That's an institution at McGill, right?
Exactly.
And so our team was called the Disciples of Nistatus, which very few people will recognize that name maybe. Professor Nistatus was actually, for a long time, he was the mechanics one to the professor in mechanics. And he was a big personality. And so we thought the Disciples of Nistatus was a fitting tribute to a professor that we all respected tremendously. So, so that was the name of our team. I don't think we ever won a championship, but we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And let's see, I was involved in a number of different committees as the VP academic and
right, of course.
Started a number of different initiatives, some of which may or may not be happening still. There was at the time an initiative called the EUS Equipment Fund, which helped to fund labs that were having trouble finding funding elsewhere. And so that was one of the initiatives that I had a lot of involvement in at the time. It had started shortly before my tenure there. And I remember spending a lot of time trying to, make sure that process went smoothly. And just, I remember the pub nights and being involved in a lot of those kinds of things. That was my last year in mechanical engineering for my undergraduate. And so it was also the first year that I spent not living at home. So I lived in an apartment a few blocks away from campus in the ghetto, and so it was a really magical year, with lots of new experiences and just a lot of fun. Not a ton of sleep, but a lot of fun. And so I remember I look upon that very fondly. That was just a tremendous year. Pardon my phone ringing. This is the beauty of doing these interviews during COVID time, is we're stuck at work and stuff happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think your involvement, like as VP academic, helped you out with did it help you out, for example, in your graduate studies or getting in, for example?
I think it helped in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's sort of the general being involved in student government, I think gives you an appreciation for how a university works, the inner workings of the university. It also, as through those activities, you meet people that you otherwise would never have the opportunity to interact with within the faculty, within the administration of the university. That was a very sort of valuable for me to sort of get that kind of understanding. Plus also it's sort of like running a little bit of a business, right? So it's also giving you that kind of life experience in terms of organizing activities and being proactive and engaged, which ends up helping you as you sort of continue in life's path. I would say that the academic piece of it as well was important to me because I was going to continue on to grad school. It was good for me to sort of get to be able to get a lot of visibility into the academic processes and aspects of engineering at a university like McGill. So I think it helped me in many different ways. And I mean, beyond that, just sort of the camaraderie and the friendships that are built, you know, when you're in that kind of tight-knit family like you are in a engineering society. I think that was amazing. Look back very fondly on all of those years.
Yeah, for sure. You get to meet a lot of people and contacts, and I'm sure you got to talk to profs and maybe you get like references or something. That
Absolutely.
can be really useful. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if you had to give advice to yourself when you were 20 years old, what would you say?
So that's an interesting question.
Good one.
I think the world has changed a lot since I was in your shoes. So if I was 20 years old today, I definitely I would give myself advice to do things differently than I did them, right? I think back in the day, for whatever reason, the expectations for from employers, the expectations from, you know, graduate programs, for you know, bringing people in. I think in general, the competitiveness today is higher than it ever has been. And so the kinds of things that employers and graduate programs are looking for out of their students includes a lot more sort of practical, experiential kinds of things than I might have had to worry about when I was in school. I think that, you know, for me, I was able to do some research projects and had, you know, some research experience working with Professor Misra as a research assistant during my last year. But, you know, I did not, I think today's environment is such that undergraduates are under a lot more pressure to sort of get technical jobs, you know, during their studies, and to have that kind of experience to show on their resume, to do a lot more of extracurricular kinds of activities like a robotics club or you know, hackathon organization, and whatever the activity is. That kind of expectation is much higher now than it ever has been. So my advice to myself as a 20-year-old today, or to anyone else for that matter, is to just make sure that you've got that sort of balanced view on your resume, right? I mean, a lot will depend on what you're looking to do next. If you're going to go on to grad school next, obviously good grades are a must for everyone, you know, do good in school, right? But if you're going to continue on in grad school, get that research experience in a lab or, you know, out in industry. If you're going to try to, you know, get a technical job as an engineer after your undergraduate, make sure that you've had good internship experiences and course projects that are sort of relevant and that speak to your interests and what you want to do after that. Because I think the competition for these kinds of technical jobs is a lot higher, and just the expectations are a lot higher now. So just, I guess I don't want to, you know, scare anyone off, but just to encourage everyone to make sure to think about that while you're, you know, enjoying your years of undergraduate. Fill in with sort of interesting experiences that will be in line with what you want to do next, right? You may not know exactly what you want to do next, but in that case, experience a few different kinds of either internship types of things or extracurricular kinds of activities. And that will help a lot, I think, in terms of selling yourself to a future employer or to a grad school program.
Yeah, so try to figure out what you want to do first, and then getting as much experience in that field and like varied experience in that field.
I think that's part of it, but I think it's realistically not everyone knows what they want to do, right? I mean, you know, I came into undergraduate and I kind of knew I was a space nut, and they didn't have an aerospace program at McGill, but they had an aeronautics option, and I liked air and space, and so I did the aeronautics option. But I think a lot of people don't have the same kind of, you know, certainty in what their path where their path might take them. But there are just, you know, a variety of technical experiences, right, that allow you to sort of demonstrate that you have skills beyond book smarts, right? I think is important. even if they're not directly aligned with your future career, because you might not know what that is. I think that's okay. I think it needs to sort of give you a sort of a breadth of experience that people are going to be looking for now. And to the extent that you do know, some of the things that you're interested in, try to get a few sort of key experiences that are aligned with that.
And I imagine you hire interns sometimes. Is that something that you consider when you hire them? Like, oh, they have like a big area of they tried a lot of things.
Absolutely. I mean, it's more and more. The grade point average. To be honest, GPA is almost an afterthought. We sort of take it for granted, right? And we say, you've got to do at least this good, and we'll only consider people who are, at least this good. But then in that group, which is a big pool, of international pool, although we hire a lot of people from the United States, graduating from the United States, but that's a big pool. And so, you really have to look at what discriminates candidates, right? And I think the expectations are a bit different depending on what kind of intern you're hiring. If you're hiring in, call it a freshman, right? A first year undergraduate student, that they're not going to have a ton of experience unless they're just happen to have this amazing foresight in high school to work in some sort of a technical internship, right? But that very rarely happens. But even then, you're sort of looking for extracurricular things that give them an edge over somebody else. But then as you get further along, and you're looking more and more towards the juniors or the seniors, the people who are graduating next year, and who might be looking for full-time hire, then you're sort of looking for candidates who have an edge one way or another, right? And your first impression is on paper, right? Usually, and so you sort of want to make a good first impression in that regard. And then, of course, once you get a face-to-face interview, then there's a whole other set of skills there.
Right. Do you hire a lot of like first years or undergraduates for that matter?
We hire a lot of undergraduates. I would say, we mostly, I would say that, we don't hire as many fresh out, first year undergraduates, just because they don't come with as much experience and their skill set isn't as developed because they haven't done the coursework that gives them a solid basis for what we might need them to do. But we do hire some. And then it sort of grows, we hire more sophomores or second years and then third years. And then of course, once you're in, you get into that last year, you're either looking for a job after you're done, or you're going to go on to grad school, and then we might hire you for an internship between undergrad and grad school. We actually also hire graduate interns, right? So people who are doing their master's or their doctorate, who want to just take a break for a summer and work at a place like JPL and get a different experience. Or in some cases, we actually have a connection with the faculty member who advises them, and we're doing research in an area that's related to their thesis work. And so then there's a nice best of both worlds situation where someone can come out and work at JPL, but in an area that's closely related to what the kind of research that they're doing. I think that's really great when that can happen.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. And so we're almost done. You mentioned we have 10 minutes left. So we could talk about how the space industry is evolving. And, there's a lot of change these past few years. I imagine you've been kind of influenced by that change with SpaceX and everything.
Yeah, the space business is changing a lot. It's changing in lots of different ways, actually. I mean, there's some visible ways, right? SpaceX is a constant presence on the news. And they have really, shaken up the industry, especially the launch industry, right, in the way that they can bring reusable vehicles at significantly lower cost to the space industry, right? So whether you're launching, a communications satellite or a deep space mission or rovers that are headed to Mars, right? The idea that you can do that for much less money is very appealing, because launch is a significant, fraction of missions cost, even though it lasts a very short period of time, right? And so, but there's lots of other changes, just sea changes, like massive changes in the industry that have happened. The whole advent of small sats and CubeSats, changing the way that we do remote sensing here on Earth or telecommunications here on Earth. There's the world of Earth observation, weather forecasting, climate monitoring, and wildfire and sea level rise and all of that, that's changing fundamentally with new classes of spacecraft that we can launch, much more easily. There's a number of players in the small sat launch arena, and a number of different players, of people who build these small sats and CubeSats. I mean, university students can build spacecraft now, right? That was never the case back when I was growing up, right? I think fundamentally that move to smaller platforms, but increasingly capable small platforms, is fundamentally changing certainly Earth science and our way of life here on Earth in ways that I described, including telecommunications. But then also deep space, right? We're getting to a point where we're able to send along, like for our last, one of our recent Mars missions, the InSight mission to Mars, had a little CubeSat that flew with it called Marco, which served as a communications relay while the spacecraft was descending to the surface of Mars. And it was really a technology validation mission, but it proved that these small sats can do big things and they don't cost a lot of money. So that we're going to be moving to a regime where all of our missions pretty soon will be flying with ride-along value-adding small sats to do additional functions, sometimes very different missions that they drop off along the way or things like that, right? So I think that the industry is changing a lot, and a lot of that is now moving out into sort of commercialization, right? There's a lot of companies that are able to sort of drive some of this innovation. I think NASA still, has its critical role to play out in the forefront. And I say NASA, but this is equally applicable to the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency. All of these governmental space agencies have a critical role to play in sort of doing the first thing, the first thing that's never been done before, right? To get us out to the outer planets, send a spacecraft into interstellar medium, image the first extrasolar planet, right? Those kinds of missions are ones that there's no business case for that, right? But there's a strong science motivation. And so it makes sense for government to fund that. But then, eventually commercialization catches up, and we're starting to see that with the moon. There's now a whole, program at NASA to sort of commercialize or help commercialization of moon landings and having instrumentation on the moon. And we're going to see that take off.
Like a lunar base. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's not something that you're really aware about when you're not in the industry, like the general population, that the satellites are getting, like the CubeSats and everything, it's getting way more advanced, but it's really having an impact. Really, it's really interesting.
It is. And one of the beauties of it, though, is that it also really brings spacecraft, which has sort of been the realm of rocket scientists, right? I mean, it brings that to the hands of students, right? I mean, I don't know if McGill has a CubeSat
I think we
effort.
have. Yeah.
So, that's new since the last time, I visited, but that's terrific, right? I mean, that's exactly what we want out of these programs. Is we want spacecraft and space missions to not be something that's just sort of out there and theoretical and that people don't understand. But we want to bring it to the hands of people who are who are learning and who can bring, new ideas to it. And I think that it's very important to do that, at the university level or earlier even, right? Engaging high school kids in contributing to this can really ignite their passion for science and math. And I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I was just checking it out on my phone. So we have the McGill Space Group, which I think they build a CubeSat. And we have also the McGill Rocket Team where we send...
Rocket Team.
Yeah, the rocket team, we send like a rocket to 30,000 feet.
Right.
And, yeah, so
yes.
it's available to us. And so you were mentioning earlier, like getting experience in the fields, for example, in that field. So these are great examples where
those would be terrific opportunities. But things like solar car, things like I don't know if they still do the SAE race car effort. I mean, those are all similar kinds of experiences, not on the space side, but we'll look at that on a resume and we'll say, hey, this person knows how to, build something. They know how software interfaces with hardware and they know how hard that is, right? Yeah. All of those experiences add a lot of value.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's been terrific talking to you, Michelle. So now, what's next for you? Do you have any plans or objectives?
Well, I guess the big objective is to finally figure out when we can go on vacation again. The COVID-19 situation has proven to be challenging for everyone. I have a first grader, 6-year-old boy who's, doing school from home. Oh, yeah. So he was upstairs earlier on in our interview, just finishing his classes for the day, in fact. Just looking forward to being able to take a vacation, I think. Working from home is tough.
Exactly.
Especially when you're sort of stuck sharing a small house with 3 other people online with all, everyone has their own considerations. But in sort of the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of interesting opportunity, in the technology world at JPL. My big role is to really try to carry our, take our systems engineering expertise. JPL is really well known as a systems engineering house, and it's something that we've done well to be able to field missions like Voyager, Cassini, Curiosity, Perseverance, and so on. But the complexity of our missions is increasing dramatically, and our ways of managing that complexity of doing our work has traditionally been very old school. It's PowerPoint and it's Excel spreadsheets and it's documentation, and we need to advance our capabilities to much more, to taking advantage of information technology in a much more significant way. They call it digital engineering or model-based engineering. I think that's sort of the buzzword of the day, but it's really where we're looking to sort of modernize our capabilities and be able to develop the complex missions of the future. So that's a big area that I'm personally quite invested in. And we're trying to make tremendous strides in that area. Mission autonomy, spacecraft, making them smarter. Of course, that's my passion and has been since I did my doctoral work. And then increasingly making our missions secure. Cybersecurity is a huge area that frankly, we haven't worried as much about as we need to be worrying about today. So those 3 areas are really sort of my big portfolio for the foreseeable future in trying to advance our capabilities.
Yeah, so about that first one, for us at school, like at McGill, for example, I think COVID has really helped jumpstart the move to online and how we conduct classes. Now we have access to videos of lectures, so it's really different, and that's how we adapt.
It's interesting. The COVID, as hard as it has been, there are going to be some silver linings out of it, and I think kickstarting new ways of working together, I think is going to be part of that. Although I do miss being able to see my colleagues and actually, be in a room with them. We'll get back to that eventually, but probably not for another little while.
Yeah, we'll see, I guess, probably someday.
Maybe within the year. I hope so, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a VP events of MAME, but we can't really run like events in person, right? Well,
How many online events can you hold, right?
exactly. So we're doing the podcast right now, and we're gonna probably hold a few events in parks and things like that. But yeah, hopefully it starts back soon enough.
Maybe after January things will get better.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was great talking to you, and thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. It's always nice to be back at McGill, even if it's just virtually. So yeah. Good luck, everybody. We'll see you soon.
When the borders open, you should definitely come. I'll give you a personal tour of campus.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been back, and I remember some of the professors are even still there from when I was there. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's nice to see everybody again.
Great. Well, see ya. Bye.
Okay. Bye, Philippe.
Bye.
Salut.
Salut.